According to his Marine Corps records, Oswald asked for and received an extension to his overseas tour in Japan. But on June 30th of 1958, immediately after his second incident of being court-martialed, when Oswald spoke provoking words to a senior non-commissioned officer, the extension of his overseas tour of duty was canceled. Oswald arrived in San Francisco in early November and then had a month of leave. After that, he reported to Marine Air Control Squadron No. 9, or MAX 9. The Warren Report says that MAX 9 was at El Toro, California, but Commission Exhibit 1961, the document the Commission relied on to show the dates that Oswald served at each respective location, describes the base as MAX 9 El Toro (Santa Ana). This may not make much difference. However, it is worth pointing out because these were, and still are, two separate bases. One is in El Toro and the other is in Santa Ana. The Marine Corps Air Station was in El Toro, and it housed between 5,000 to 7,000 Marines. This El Toro base was known as MAX 3. The lighter-than-air facility was located near Santa Ana and housed less than 700 Marines. It was referred to as MAX 9. So the Warren Report should have just said that Oswald was at MAX 9 in Santa Ana. The inclusion of El Toro is confusing and is not correct. When Oswald was at Santa Ana, his job duties consisted mostly of janitorial work, which was the result of him having been court-martialed twice. He also had to make coffee and mow the lawn. During his time at Santa Ana, Oswald was an enigma to his peers. Mac Osborne, who bunked with Oswald, told the FBI that Oswald said he hit a man with a bottle and fought a guard while he was in the brig at Atsugi. Both of these statements seem to be fabrications on Oswald's part, as that he was not prone to violence, which is somewhat counter to the image of a rough-and-tumble Marine. Nelson Delgado was also Oswald's bunkmate, and he said that Oswald liked classical music and the opera. Delgado said he never heard Oswald discuss his past, whether it was his personal life or the Marines. Another Marine who met Oswald at Santa Ana was Carrie Thornley, who worked with Oswald from about April through June of 1959. He and Oswald both shared an interest in reading and were both atheists. Thornley said that Oswald had, quote, a definite tendency toward irrationality at times and emotional instability. We'll hear from Carrie Thornley again later. The Warren Report says that Oswald was discharged from the Marines in September of 1959, with his last duty station being Santa Ana. But according to a 1963 FBI report, Major William Gorski, the assistant provost marshal at the El Toro base, says that Oswald was discharged from the El Toro base in March of 1959. This discharge happened after Oswald was arrested by the police in Santa Ana for hitchhiking. The underlying documents to support Gorski's claim have all disappeared, so we don't have any information at all to vet the claim made by Major Gorski. We know that Oswald was serving at Santa Ana, not El Toro, in March of 1959, so the idea that he would be discharged from El Toro doesn't fit the record, but I don't see how we can just sweep the Gorski FBI report under the rug. Did the assistant provost marshal at the El Toro base just make up a false story about Oswald getting arrested for hitchhiking? Or is something else happening here? On top of the Gorski FBI report, there's one more potential piece of evidence to show that Oswald may not have been in Santa Ana for most of 1959. A man named Valentine Ashworth wrote a letter to Jim Garrison in 1967 saying that he knew Oswald and spent time with Oswald before he went to Russia. Ashworth, who claimed he was a captain in the Cuban Raider Command, said that he met Oswald in New Orleans and ended up being his roommate there. He also claims that he traveled with Oswald to Columbus, Ohio, where he and Oswald attempted to join the Cuban Exile Army. Ashworth also said that while he was in Columbus with Oswald, they met Clay Shaw, who would later be charged for the murder of President Kennedy by District Attorney Jim Garrison. Now, Ashworth was in jail at the time when he wrote this letter to Jim Garrison. So, of course, he wanted Garrison to get him out of jail and to help him get out of the country in exchange for testifying. Ashworth certainly had an angle, there's no doubt about that, so his statements have to be taken with a grain of salt. But a letter that was written by Ashworth's cellmate to the New Orleans FBI in October of 1967 seems to confirm what Ashworth was saying. The cellmate listed accusations in statements that were made by Ashworth that were consistent with what he told Jim Garrison. But in that same letter, the cellmate raised concerns about Ashworth's mental health. Valentine Ashworth was either crazy, as some of the documents say, or he was trying to manipulate District Attorney Garrison to get him out of jail. Or he was telling the truth. David Bucknell was a Marine who served with Oswald in Santa Ana. Now, Bucknell wasn't interviewed by the FBI or the Warren Commission, but he did speak with Mark Lane, and he told him a few things about Oswald that are sure to get your attention. One day when Oswald and Bucknell were having some drinks at a tavern near the base, Oswald opened up to Bucknell about his time in Japan. He shared a story about when he was alone at a fancy bar called the Queen Bee and was approached by a beautiful Japanese woman who had questions for Oswald about his work on the U-2 spy plane based out of Atsugi. When he got back to the base, Oswald reported this interaction to his superior officer. Shortly after that, Oswald was introduced to a man in civilian clothes and identified this man as a security intelligence operator who told Oswald he could do his country a great service by providing false information to this woman. Oswald agreed to participate. He told Bucknell that he was given spending money so that he could go to the Queen Bee, and he was encouraged to enter into a sexual relationship with the woman who was asking him questions. As we discussed in the last episode, Oswald was treated for gonorrhea, a sexually transmitted disease, on numerous occasions while he was in Japan. Zach Stout, one of the Marines who was with Oswald at Atsugi, told the House Select Committee on Assassinations that Oswald would often visit the Queen Bee and seemed to be with the same Japanese girl every night. Despite Oswald's diances with this woman likely giving him gonorrhea, the Marine Corps medical records say that the disease was contracted, quote, in the line of duty, and it was, quote, not due to Oswald's own misconduct. The meaning of this notation on Oswald's medical records that he contracted gonorrhea in the line of duty, due to no fault of his own, is, of course, disputed. Author Edward Epstein said that he was told the Marines always write in the line of duty for any disease or injury. Now, this reporter did not serve in the Marines in the 1950s, and I have not had similar experiences in my own limited military enlistment, so I cannot say whether this unwritten policy is accurate or not. But a plain reading of the phrase "not due to his own misconduct" implies that however Oswald got gonorrhea, it was done in furtherance of his military duties, and he didn't get in any trouble for it. Aside from the gonorrhea diagnosis, another reason to entertain David Bucknell's story about what Oswald told him is that the Queen Bee was too expensive for most enlisted men. It never made sense that Oswald would be able to afford to go there on a regular basis. This idea that Oswald was given money by the CIA or the military or whoever for the purpose of spreading disinformation to his Japanese girlfriend sounds pretty wild. But we also know that Oswald probably wouldn't have been able to afford the Queen Bee without some financial help. The things that Bucknell told Mark Lane about Oswald's time in Japan are just Bucknell's recollections of what Oswald told him. In the vernacular of the rules of evidence, those kinds of statements are called hearsay. But Bucknell also told Lane about experiences he had with Oswald in Santa Ana that suggest that Oswald may have had intelligence connections while he was in the Marines. Bucknell said that in 1959, Oswald, Bucknell, and others were ordered to meet with a civilian to discuss participating in an intelligence operation against communists in Cuba. Oswald was selected and agreed to participate. He told Bucknell that the person who acted as his contact for intelligence operations at Santa Ana was the same person he had worked with at Atsugi. Oswald also shared with Bucknell that he, quote, was going to be discharged from the Marines very soon, and he would resurface in the Soviet Union. He said he was being sent there on assignment by American intelligence and would return to the United States as a hero in 1961. If what Bucknell says is true, it's some of the most important testimony we've heard so far. On the other hand, let's not forget the source of the claim. It doesn't have the same credibility level as under oath testimony, but it is coming from someone who was there with Oswald, even if it was published in Hustler magazine. One of the most overlooked things that Oswald did while he was in the Marines was his application to the Albert Schweitzer College in Cherwalden, Switzerland. Oswald applied to the Albert Schweitzer College on March 19th of 1959. On June 19th, after receiving an acceptance letter from the school, Oswald sent in $25 as a deposit to hold his seat. In May, Oswald received a list of 13 students who would also be attending Albert Schweitzer. Despite Oswald telling his friend, Nelson Delgato, that he was planning to attend college in Switzerland, Oswald never had any further communication with Albert Schweitzer College after sending the deposit. He never even visited Switzerland. Later, when Oswald applied for a passport, just before he was discharged from the Marines, Oswald listed the reason for travel as, quote, to attend the College of A. Schweitzer in Chur, Switzerland, and the University of Turku in Finland. Vincent Bugliosi raised what some thought was a good point on Oswald's application to Albert Schweitzer College. He said, quote, Oswald's intention to attend the staid Albert Schweitzer College is jarring, to say the least, and cannot be taken at face value. On the other hand, it is equally hard to see, if it were all a ruse, what the purpose of that ruse would be. I agree that this application can't be taken very seriously, but as you will see, there are reasons for Oswald to apply to a college somewhere in Europe. One possible answer for why Oswald would apply to a college overseas is that Marines were required to serve 3 years of inactive duty after being discharged. Travel abroad was not allowed during that 3-year period without a valid reason. Going to college abroad was considered one of the valid reasons and was thus an exception to the rule. This meant that Oswald could leave the country during his 3 years of inactive service instead of having to wait another 3 years, if he said he was going to college somewhere overseas. That's why Oswald could have applied to any college overseas. After all, it didn't matter where he was going to college for him to get around the 3-year no-travel rule. It could have been anywhere in Europe. So the real question is, why on earth did Lee Harvey Oswald apply to attend the Albert Schweitzer College? There certainly had to be other European schools with cheaper application fees if his only intention was to have a decoy school to justify getting around the 3 years of inactive service rule. The village of Cherwalden, nestled in the dramatic mountains of the Swiss Alps, was the home for Albert Schweitzer College. There was no bus or railway service to the village. The college opened its doors to students in the fall of 1954. In the 1958 to 1959 school year, which was when Oswald applied, a total of only 30 students were in the graduating class, and none of them were from Switzerland. So where did this mysterious college come from? The school was started by the International Association for Religious Freedom and its fundraising arm, the Friends of Albert Schweitzer College Inc., a New York corporation that had 3 directors, with one of them being Percival Brundage. Brundage wasn't just the director. He was the president of the Friends of Albert Schweitzer College from 1953 until 1958. So who exactly was Percival Brundage? Brundage served in the Bureau of the Budget for the Eisenhower administration from 1954 until 1960 and was the director of the budget from 1956 to 1958. Multiple credible reports have shown that Brundage had other ties that weren't visible at first glance. In 1979, the New York Times wrote a piece, and a quote from that piece is, "In 1973, Percival Brundage and another former government official were said, by sources in the charter airline industry, to have acted for the Central Intelligence Agency in the 1960 purchase by the CIA of Southern Air Transport of Miami. The agency apparently used the airline in paramilitary operations in the Congo, the Caribbean, and Indochina." A Newsweek article of May 19th of 1975 said that Percival Brundage was linked to 4 CIA front companies: Double Check Corporation, which was used to recruit pilots for covert missions against Cuba; the Robert R. McMullen Company, which provided cover for CIA personnel in Stockholm, Mexico, and Singapore; Zenith Technical Enterprises, which organized and funded Operation Mongoose, and Southern Air Transport, an airline used by the CIA during Iran-Contra, which would go on to be sold to Jeffrey Epstein's financier Lexley Wexner. So, the New York Times and Newsweek say that the president of the Friends of Albert Schweitzer College worked with the CIA. The mysterious CIA ties of Percival Brundage beg the question of whether Albert Schweitzer College was being used for intelligence purposes. My mind continues to draw back to the question of how Oswald could have possibly known about Albert Schweitzer College. I mean, it's not like the place was visible like Princeton or Yale or even a smaller school of some stature at the time. And why did he choose that particular school to apply to? Could it may have been that he was encouraged or even told to do so? It also seems quite clear that Oswald would have had a hard time affording school since the tuition at Albert Schweitzer College was $2,800 a year, and Oswald didn't have anywhere near that in savings. There could have been funds available through the GI Bill, but most post-military personnel that pursue continued education after military service and use the GI Bill money to fund that choice aren't going to big-name frontline schools, or very expensive private schools nestled in the picturesque Swiss Alps. Now, there really is no hard evidence of exactly what the CIA was doing at Albert Schweitzer, but they have been known to cover their tracks pretty good or just outright destroy records when it suits their needs. So getting any of that evidence would be a pretty tough task, if not an impossible one. But the associations of Percival Brundage make it clear that Albert Schweitzer College had a man running its finance operations who was repeatedly used as an asset for U.S. intelligence. And for some reason, this is the school that Oswald chose to apply to, apparently as a cover to defect to the Soviet Union, which he told his friend David Bucknell he was going to do, and he would return to the USA as a hero. The real question remains, why did Oswald pick Albert Schweitzer College, which had been in existence for less than 5 years at the time, and only had 30 students as the decoy that would allow him to travel internationally? I suppose it is possible that Oswald just came across one of the very few newspaper advertisements that Albert Schweitzer College ran. There is a copy of one of their ads in the National Archives, but it is unknown which cities or papers it was run in, or when it was ran. It doesn't matter if you're absolutely certain that Oswald fired all 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, or if he was just a small part of some much larger conspiracy. One must admit that him choosing such an unknown school to apply to, as a ruse to get around the 3-year inactive service rule, whose chief fundraiser had deep ties to U.S. intelligence and the CIA, makes it appear as though he was encouraged, if not told to do so. So, now we are left with many more questions than actual answers, and we will continue to dig as deep as our meager shovel can go to get to the bottom of this crater-like hole that is the entire picture surrounding the JFK assassination. We will be presenting one more chapter, or episode, concerning Oswald's time surrounding his military service, so please keep an eye out for that. And go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, if you haven't already done so. This helps us a great deal in our continuing efforts to produce our content. So, until next time, take care and be positive.